Perfect. So welcome, everyone. I think most of you have been here for previous sessions. If you haven't, my name is Lisa Hoffart. I'm a registered psychologist and a mental performance consultant. I'm based in Regina, and I work with the Sport Medicine and Science Council of Saskatchewan. As you can see tonight, we're talking about emotional regulation. And what we're going to do is, for the first part of the session, we're going to just start to develop some awareness of emotions and start to understand kind of why we have them and where they come from. Then the second half of the session, really want to build into that from a sport perspective. So to look at how emotions impact our performance, be able to look at how maybe they've negatively impacted our performance, but also recognizing that they can have a positive impact too. And then just give you some strategies to be able to look at regulating your emotions. And one of the things that I'm going to make a note of now, I'm using the word regulation as opposed to the word control. You're going to see as we go through the session tonight that it's really difficult to control our emotions. We can't force ourselves to feel a certain way. What we want to do is we want to regulate it so that we don't get too far in one way or too far in the other. We want to come back to some sort of midpoint balance. And so we're going to look at different ways to regulate ourselves. It's kind of like a thermostat. We don't want to get too hot or too cold. We want to be at this kind of balanced midpoint, while recognizing that we're not going to be ever kind of perfectly there. We're going to be hovering around a certain range. So that's something to keep in mind. And I just wanted to start off by explaining why I'm using the term regulation. That being said, we're doing this as a check-in tonight. How are you feeling today? It's a really good way for you to just take a look at some of the different words, some of the different emotions that are actually on this screen. If you want to share it in the chat, go for it. It's not required. It's more just for a self-awareness and to have this check-in. Anytime we can stop and think, how am I doing? And to start naming those emotions, it's a really good strategy in terms of being able to increase our self-awareness. So I'll just pause, let you take a look. Obviously, there aren't, every single emotion is not listed here. So if there's something on here that you're feeling but not noticing, it's fine to name that for yourself as well. And so, like I said, doing that check-in for yourself is really important. It gives you a starting point to ask yourself, how am I doing? Just to be able to normalize asking that to yourself, normalize doing that check-in. Sometimes athletes like to actually write that down for themselves. If you're keeping a training log or a training journal, that could be something that you're adding in, just different emotions that maybe you notice through your training session or through your round. But it also could be different emotions that you've noticed through the day, or maybe an overall theme for the day. And so that can sometimes be helpful too, because then you're gathering extra information, and that just gives you a sense of where things are at, and sometimes that can have an impact on performance, as we'll see as we go through the session. So that's our first activity. The next one I think is probably going to be pretty easy, but it does require some participation on your end. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a series of emotions. I'm going to ask you to identify what they are. And so this is where, if you can put them in the chat, that's great, just to be able to start sharing that way. So I'm going to pull the chat up on my end, and I'm going to show you our first one. So what emotion is this? Yeah, it could be shy. What other? Embarrassed? Yeah, you can put it directly to me. You can put it to everyone. Yep, surprised maybe. Shocked. Yeah, we've got a couple shocked coming in. Nervous. Yeah, perfect. And so this is fun. Like we use emotions, we use emojis all the time. And obviously we're reading emotions all the time, just in terms of our interactions with people. And we're getting a range of answers here. And there's no right or wrong. I've got a number of different words written down that you might have used. And so it could be fearful, it could be anxious, it could be kind of apprehensive. There could be signs of distress or uneasiness, dread, surprise, shock. So lots of different things that could come up here. So we're going to do this for a few more. What's this one? Perfect. We've got some coming in. Happy, proud, excited. Absolutely. Energetic. Maybe there's a guiltiness. Yeah. Trying to like over amplify things. Yes. Okay. Yes, we've got some really good ones. And it's nice to see the range too, because sometimes we interpret things differently. It's like the guilty, there's maybe this over expression trying to hide something, feeling like you're trying to hide something that you did wrong, and there's that sense of guilt. But it could be other emotions: happy, proud, excited. There could be joy, elation, delight, amusement, lots of different things. And again, trying to give you a range of words, because the more words we can use to name emotions and describe emotions, the more we can start to accurately express ourselves with it, and the more we can start to be able to interact with people on that as well. It's all about the emotional intelligence piece. Okay, next one. This one, how would you describe this one? What emotion is this? Yeah, we've got disappointed, we've got sad, upset, disappointed again, yeah. Shamed, yeah, good one. Yeah, I'm trying to see. Looks like we've got, yeah, most of them I think I've said. Sadness, unhappy, sorrow, dejected, depressed, um, ashamed, lots of different words that could come in. And again, just trying to pick up on some of the different features that you're seeing there. Okay, we've got a few more. How would you describe this one? Hey, surprised, shocked, embarrassed. Yep, embarrassed a couple times. Another embarrassed. Yep. Anything else? Yeah, so I had surprised, embarrassed. Maybe there's a sense of astonishment or shock, amazement. There could be different things that are coming in. I think when we see the cheeks, though, that sometimes hints that there's a sense of sometimes it feels like you're embarrassed or that there's that flush that's coming in. Hey, this one, how would you describe this one? Angry, furious. Yeah, angry. Enraged. Yep, perfect. Anything else? Okay. Um, so I had anger, fury, wrath. It could be bitterness or loathing, resentment, hate. So again, the more we have some of these different words, we can see that they start to mean different things or convey something that's slightly different. It's probably still that underlying anger, but a loathing is different than a bitterness, different than a hate. And so it starts to convey different things to us. So we've got one last one. Disapproval. Yeah, good one. Any other words that come to mind? Disappointed. Yeah, good one. Not supportive. Awesome. So we've got some good words. Some of the ones that I had that haven't been shared: disgust, feeling revolted, contempt. So different things that might come up there. And so again, we use emojis all the time. We use it as a way to express ourselves, and it's starting to replace some of our written communication. So it can just be interesting to see how we maybe interpret some of these things. And obviously, some of these are maybe similar to what you use, or some of them are quite different. But just being able to start using those emotionally. And as I was going through and kind of saying some of them, you can see we often have a range. So you could be sad, you could be overwhelmed, you could be depressed, and we can go through kind of this spectrum in terms of how intense those emotions are. If you're feeling angry or a little bit worked up, that's maybe different than if you're outraged or if you're feeling that you're just in a fury or something like that. And so again, we can have this spectrum to be able to describe our different emotions. And so again, it's just being able to start working on naming them and working at what those emotions mean to us. And so what research is showing is that we actually have 8 different basic emotions. And so a lot of these are ones that we ran through just through some of those emojis that I was showing you. We've got anger, fear, anticipation, surprise, joy, sadness, trust, and disgust. But each emotion has a purpose. And so emotions are things that obviously we experience as humans. It's part of our day-to-day life. but that they actually start to give us meaning to our life. It helps us to be able to start interpreting things, to be able to making things have some purpose for ourselves. And so one of the things that emotions actually do is that it actually helps to prepare us for action. And so emotions come from our brain. It comes from the amygdala. We don't need to get into that in a lot of detail, but it's part of how our brain primes us to respond. And so with that emotional response, we're able to then trigger a number of different body reactions, which can allow us to actually physically respond then. And so that can be something where we maybe need the extra energy to be able to complete a task, or if we're feeling really fearful, maybe we need to protect ourselves or run away. And so those different emotions are helping us to be able to react and take action to the world around us. Emotions can also help us to be able to communicate what's going on for us, being able to express what's going on inside. And so we can obviously use our words, use our language, our spoken language, our written language to be able to express that, to be able to make those connections with people, to be able to build those relationships and kind of feel like we're relating to other people. But also, I think it's really important to recognize that we don't just communicate through our emotion. So we can pick up a lot just based on how people are looking. So how their facial expression is, what their body language is like. And so that's something that we can pick up with other people, but also recognizing for ourselves, if we're aware of our own body language, that can sometimes give us cues about how we might be feeling. But also, just like our emotions can affect our body can affect our brain, which can affect our emotions. So sometimes if we can pay attention to our body language, that sends signals to our brain, which can then start to change some of our emotions. We'll get into that in more detail as we go through the session, but just recognizing that body language can have a big impact. It can be impacted a lot by our emotions. And so again, just kind of recognizing that we've got these different emotions, and that emotions can also help us to feel motivated. So if we're feeling that we've just gone through this experience, that we've just had this great round of golf, or that we played at this really nice course, and you're feeling really excited, really joyful, maybe you're feeling really proud because you golf so well, you're probably going to want to keep playing. You're probably going to want to go back and play at that course again. If you just feel like things went horrible, you had a really bad round, a really bad game, you're really angry, you're really frustrated, you're really upset, maybe it's going to make you less likely to want to play there again. Or maybe there's going to be things that you feel like you need to change. So our emotions can sometimes impact what our future actions are going to do and how we want to respond. So again, just recognizing that we have emotions for a purpose. So when we actually have these emotional responses, like I said, what we go through is our brain starts to respond, and it leads us through a number of different pieces. And if we can start to understand this is one of the steps in terms of being able to then look at how we're regulating our emotions. So our emotions are impacted by the experience that we're in. So by how we actually interpret that experience. And so you can look at a certain situation, and you can have two people in that situation, and they might feel very different emotions. And so it could even just be something like going into, say, a really big tournament. You're going into a really big round of golf or a really big weekend, and maybe some people are feeling really excited. They've been working towards it. There's a lot of anticipation. There's kind of an eagerness to get started, and they're feeling some of those reactions. And other people might be feeling really tentative, really fearful, really nervous or stressed. And that might be their emotional reaction too. And so that might be based on level of preparation. It might be based on how their training has been going or how their last tournament went, some of those different pieces. And so that's all based on their past experiences. It's based on how they're interpreting that event. So that can be one of the things that impacts our emotions. We can also notice that we've got a physiological response. And basically that's how our body is actually responding to that situation. And you can see here, you might be sweating, you might feel like you've got goosebumps, you might feel like you're starting to get shaky, or that your muscles are tensing up. You might notice that your heart rate is increasing. There's so many different ways that our emotions can actually affect our bodies. And then from there, our brain is obviously sending our body a lot of signals. Then we have a response. And this response, you hear it says behavioral. We can kind of split it into a behavioral in terms of what we're doing, in terms of our actions, but sometimes that can influence our thoughts, our body language, like we talked about as well. So lots of different pieces that can come up based on those different areas. So wanted to just get into this, into those three areas in a little bit more detail. So this first one, how we're actually experiencing emotions, this subjective interpretation of an event. And this is where you just get to do a bit of reflection. So what kinds of events typically get you feeling emotional? So if you can think back to a time you played, whether it was a recent practice session, or maybe it was a round that you played last summer, thinking about a time that maybe you felt really emotional. What was going on and how were you interpreting those things? So was it the person that you were playing with was maybe having a better round than you? Or was it just a not very nice day and you didn't really want to be there? Or was it other things that were coming in, things that maybe weren't related to golf, but how your day had gone before that? And so again, the more we can be aware of how we typically interpret things or what might prompt us to feel more emotional, that can be really helpful. So again, this can be based on our personality, based on past experiences. Sometimes it's also based on just how our day is going and the coping skills or coping resources we feel like we've got available to ourselves. So that awareness is going to be part of it. We're going to come back to that question in more detail. So don't worry if you're not really jotting too much down right now. We're going to have a chance to reflect on it later on in the presentation. But just diving into the physiological responses, basically what researchers did is they had participants do a series of tasks that kind of invoked different emotions in them. And then what they did is they actually had these participants rate where they noticed these emotions and how that was actually impacted in their body. And so where you see a red or a yellow, that's where they felt like something was kind of activated. If you see that blue, that's where something was kind of, it felt like it was missing or felt like something wasn't actually going on there. So maybe a numbness or an absence, an emptiness. And then the black, that's more of a neutral. And so what you can see, it's actually really cool, I think, is that these different emotions had different responses in these people's bodies. And so if you think about some of the ways that we just use kind of our common language to describe different emotions, we think about like a hothead. That's someone who's maybe quick to anger or has a quick temper. And then we look at the anger and you can see that their head's really activated. If you think about just kind of feeling empty or feeling frozen, and then you look at the person who's depressed, second row, third in, you can see that there's really a lot of absence in terms of feeling with how they're actually describing that in terms of their body. And so I think it's really interesting just to be able to take a look at this and recognizing that different emotions actually impact our bodies in different ways. And again, this I think has a really big impact in terms of you as an athlete. You recognize that you're starting to get really angry or really frustrated, and that's affecting your head, your chest, your shoulders, your arms. Well, how is that going to impact your swing? How is that going to impact your stance? And so I think that's really important to think about. Same thing if you have like a great couple holes and you're feeling really excited, really happy, again, you can see your whole body's activated, top row in the middle. Again, how does that maybe have an impact on you? And so we want to be aware of that. And we'll look at a graph in a couple slides, but just to make sure we're not getting too high. So we're not getting kind of too excited, too overwhelmed with some of those emotions, but also that we're not getting too low with some of those other emotions. One of the things too, I'll just mention here is that when we think about emotions, sometimes we talk about them in terms of positive emotions and negative emotions. And that's something that I really try to stay away from because emotions aren't good or bad, they're just experiences that we're having. And so if we start to think about these negative emotions of anger, fear, sadness, depression, anxiety, we want to try to avoid them because they're negative. And so avoiding, we'll talk about, isn't a way to deal with things all the time. We want to be able to just recognize this is how I'm feeling and what can I do to manage it, as opposed to trying to push it away. The same thing, if we're always trying to feel happy or love or pride or some of those kind of more positive emotions, that can sometimes feel like we're setting ourselves up for success or up for failure because we can't be happy all the time. It's just not part of how we're designed as humans. And so even if we were happy all the time, then we start to get used to that and we want to be chasing more happiness and more happiness.
And it's just impossible to feel happy all the time. It's
Yeah.
okay to feel these other feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
it is okay to feel a range of feelings.
The bad shot. I don't care if I lose this golf tournament, okay? I don't care whatever.
Sorry, Doug, I don't know if you, okay. Yeah, but it is.
I got that. Sorry.
Oh, all good, all good. You guys were talking about what I think it was a really good point. Yeah, we want to be able to feel a range of emotions, and that just ties in with having a range of experiences, and that's part of being human. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that. The third piece of that, so we've gone through how we, the subjective experience, we've gone through a little bit about the physiological responses. The third piece was how we actually experience emotions. And again, this is something you'll reflect on later, but just wanted to give you some examples. When we feel emotional, we can respond in a variety of ways. And so if you look at some of these behavioral responses, feeling like you're attacking or withdrawing, changes in terms of some of your day-to-day stuff, you might think, okay, for me, if I'm acting like that, what kind of emotions might I be feeling? So maybe you're feeling really fearful and you feel like you need to protect yourself, so you're attacking. Maybe you feel like you're doubting yourself, or that you're really angry or frustrated. We could obviously have a number of different behavioral responses listed there too. So it's just about, when I start to feel this emotion, what is my typical response? And is that something that I want to maintain, or is that something that I feel like I need to change? And obviously we can think about that in the broad range of our day-to-day life, or we can also think about that really specific to golf and really specific to the practice that we're going through and our competition too. So you can see too, there's a range of different behavioral responses. We might feel like we're talking a mile a minute, or that we're not talking at all. It might actually be impacting how we eat or how we sleep. We might be putting things off just because we want to avoid it. We're feeling really anxious or overwhelmed. And then two, not just in terms of the thought that we're thinking, but how our minds are actually working. So we might feel like it's really difficult to concentrate, or that we're having troubles making decisions or remembering things, that we're only focused on negative pieces, only focused on negative thoughts, or that we're overthinking things or feeling like we can't focus on different things. So again, lots of different pieces that can come up, and wanted to just start off by giving you some of this information so that as we move through towards the second half of the presentation, you're able to think about some of the examples I've given, but also your own past experiences of what your own emotional responses might be. I'm going to give, we're going to have one more slide, and then we're going to take a break for our halftime questions, as we've been doing. So just really wanted to specifically bring this back to performance. So I've given kind of a broad background in terms of emotions, about how they can benefit us, why we experience them. But if we look specifically at this graph, we can recognize that, again, we can have different activation levels, we can have different emotional levels. In terms of our performance, we want to feel like we're pretty activated, but we don't want to get too high. So it's called the catastrophe theory. And basically, once you get too emotional, once you get too activated, you have this very sharp, sudden drop off in your performance. And that's very difficult to recover from. And so it's being able to have that check-in of, how am I doing? Am I feeling like I'm getting too emotional, too activated? How am I able to regulate this to bring myself back, to make sure that I don't go overboard? You can think about yourself getting so emotional and just feeling like you've snapped, or that you go overboard. It takes a long time to actually calm yourself down and work through that. So again, it's just being aware of, okay, I'm starting to get emotional. I'm starting to notice that I'm getting frustrated, or that I'm getting maybe too excited or too worked up, whatever that is for you. And again, we'll come back to this in the second half of the presentation, but just really being able to think, okay, I notice this is happening for me. That's the first piece. That's the awareness piece of it. But also, what can I do to make sure that I'm regulating with this, coping with this right now, so that I don't hit that catastrophe point and end up dropping off that edge. So like I said, the first half is really just looking at being able to understand emotions, start thinking them through. I'm going to pause for a minute just to see if there are any questions about some of this stuff before I turn it over to Steve.
You definitely make some good points, Lisa. And sometimes with golf, when you're feeling good, you're hitting good shots, you know, your adrenaline is pumping. Sometimes you hit it farther than you normally do, and it's very important to realize that, and to try and stay as level keel as possible. And this theory really shows it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. I think as co-host, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so we'll get 3 more questions on random facts and tidbits with the rules of golf. So please send it in the chat, your answer to me or publicly, whichever you like. So we'll get started with the first one here. Okay, when a player's in the scoring area, do you have to add up the totals on the scorecard? What do you think? I can't see the chat there, so there we go. No, 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 no. That's great. Everyone's saying no, and that's what I love to see. So here, this is a handicap stroke event. So in the blue, the committee puts the name, the date. The committee will add up all the scores for you. It's great that the players do. However, the committee will go over and count all the scores anyways. So all the player needs to do is sign the scorecard. The marker and the player will do the scoring there. So love it. Right away, everybody got it. No, 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 no. It's okay if you didn't too, because this is new for some of the new golfers that are going to be competing this year. So, okay, question number 2. What's the penalty for a player that is late for their tee time? Anybody been late before? I know I have. It's a horrible feeling. Okay. Somebody else. We got 4. We got 2. We got 4. Okay. What do you think? 3. Okay. So there is a time limit. Yes. Oh. All right. So the answer is, there's actually a couple answers. You must start at, not before your starting time. So in this instance, if a player's under the 5-minute rule, okay, that's a general penalty of 2 strokes. If they're later than 5 minutes, that person will be disqualified in stroke play. Okay. There's exception number 3. Committee decides that exceptional circumstances where there's no breach of this rule. Here's a few examples. Let's say a player's at a scene of an accident. Had to be a witness kind of thing. There's a fire alarm at the player hotel. You know, they didn't have time to leave. Those would be exceptional circumstances. A couple examples of no exception. Player gets lost on his or her car, breaks down on the way to the course. Unfortunately, that's just part of life. Heavy traffic, again, that's something you should plan before you go to your event for that competitive round. So, okay. Question number 3. What's the penalty for slow play? There was on the weekend, JB Holmes, I'm surprised he didn't get penalized. So we got some 3s, a verbal warning, then 1 stroke. What is it? 1 stroke, 2 strokes, disqualified. It seems like a verbal warning would be a good start. So the answer, the committee can decide. The general rule is 2 strokes, but the committee can decide, say in match play, loss of hole, disqualification after 2 more offenses. Stroke play, 1 stroke, 2 strokes, whatever the committee decides in this matter. So before the event starts, the committee should announce that to the group, just so everybody's in the know of what the pace of play time par is. So time par is an example of how long it should take to play the course for that stipulated round. Typically, it's about 4 hours and 35 minutes. Okay. I'm going to just see if this link will play here. Okay. It's the 45-second video.
It is important that you are aware of how your pace of play impacts others. The 2019 rules encourage prompt pace of play by all players, by recommending that you play promptly throughout the round, such as by preparing in advance for each stroke, moving at a good pace between strokes and between holes, and that you make a stroke in no more than 40 seconds. The 2019 rules also expressly allow for you to agree to play out of turn in a safe and responsible way to save time or for convenience. This is often referred to as ready golf. To learn more, please visit usga.org/rules.
Okay, so those are the quick 3 rules. Again, if you have any questions on rules, send me an email. Go to usga.org. They have a ton of information on there for videos and descriptions on certain things. So thank you all. Turn it back over to Lisa.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is where we ended off, just looking at obviously emotions being part of our day-to-day, being part of what we experience at home, at work, at school, with our friends, with our family, obviously part of sport as well, and that it is natural and normal for us to experience this, but also just recognizing that if they get too intense or if they get away from us, then that can have a negative impact. And that negative impact can be at the physical level because we just get too activated and our body isn't working properly. But it can also be mentally and emotionally, just feeling like you're not able to focus and that you're not able to cope with what's going on. And so what I want to do is just walk you through a bit of an example here where we start to incorporate some of the different pieces that we were talking about earlier. So recognizing that our emotions can be impacted by the situation that we're in, our subjective experience and our subjective interpretation of that. That can impact our body, it can impact our behavior, our thoughts, and it can be a really big cycle here. And so as an example, situation might be that you make a mistake at a key moment. And so that could be the situation. And in and of itself, we could start to interpret that a number of different ways. We could look at how that might be a really negative thing, how that might be something that you're going to really interpret and react to in one way. We could also look at how maybe that's more neutral, so it doesn't have as much of a response. We could also look at how that might be a good thing or how you might actually be able to use that or work through it. So that's the situation, it is what it is. And then we can look at how one person might respond to it. So in terms of the thoughts, you make this mistake at a key moment, your thoughts might be, I failed, I'm not good enough, I can't do it. Those could be some examples, and obviously only some examples, but we'll use those for the purposes of this. From there, those thoughts and through the situation, you might be starting to feel some emotions. You might feel really worthless. You might feel really frustrated or really overwhelmed. And so those are some of the emotions that maybe you're experiencing there. You might also notice that you're having some reactions at your body. Again, just because we're having these emotions in our brain, that's going to trigger a body response. You might notice that you're starting to sweat. You might notice that your hands are kind of clammy or that your heart's starting to race or beat harder than it was. You might notice that you've got like a really heaviness in your limbs. Things just feel kind of off. And then from there, you have different behavior. And obviously behavior can be different depending on the person and depending on the situation. You might feel like you want to throw something. Maybe you actually do throw something. Maybe you stop talking, you withdraw, you don't engage with the people that you're around. Maybe you're swearing, maybe you're just kind of rattling things off. There can be so many different things that actually happen from that behavioral level. And then what that can do is that behavior can actually cycle back into the thoughts that we're having. It can make our thoughts feel like they're more productive or less productive, obviously depending on the behavior, depending on how that worked to manage our emotions, and then that can keep cycling through. So what we want to do is we want to be able to regulate our emotions and just start to work towards that. And as a starting point, what you're going to do, this is your reflection piece, is just think back to a time when you felt you had a pretty significant emotional reaction. And so this could be something, if you can keep it sport focused, that's awesome. That's obviously why we're here. If you have maybe another example that's really clear or more recent or just something that is kind of, you can generalize to other situations, that's fine as well. But maybe a time that you felt like you got too excited or got too into things, or maybe there was a time that you got really frustrated or really angry or really upset, whatever it is, maybe you were really nervous or really stressed. What are some of those situations? Just thinking through what happened, and then being able to pause, reread it, and just think, okay, obviously now we're reflecting back on it. Are there any other things you would have wanted to do? Would you have changed things? Would you have done something different? Would you have reacted in a different way? I'm going to give you kind of 3 to 5 minutes to write through this. If you want, once you're finished, you can just use the reactions buttons and give me a thumbs up, just so that I know you're finished. But like I said, about 3 to 5 minutes just to jot this down for yourself. Got a few people letting me know that they're finished. I'll give you another minute or so, recognizing that you maybe don't have time to write down everything, but this is just for a starting point, just to initiate that reflection piece. So another minute or so. Okay, so hopefully everyone had a chance at least to reflect and just start to think about this. I know sometimes it's difficult just to think, okay, what situation do I want to go through? What's maybe easiest to start with, or what's freshest in my mind? But if you really struggled, even just thinking back to generals of how do I typically respond when I start feeling this emotion, that can really be a good starting point, and just think, okay, typically, how do I respond? Typically, what do I want to do, or how would I want to change? And some of the things that we can start thinking about are just some of those reactions. And with that, especially when we look at starting to emotionally regulate ourselves, we can start to actually initiate actions or initiate behaviors as triggered by our emotions. We can start to do things or add things in to try to calm ourselves down or work through things. We can try to inhibit other actions. So if you're someone that wants to throw something or punch something, maybe that's an action that you want to inhibit or that you want to try to tame back. Obviously up to you, but that's something that you can just be thinking about. Are there things that I need to stop doing, or are there things that I need to try to reduce the frequency of? And then just looking at modulating. So kind of have a mix of those. So are there things that maybe I need to do a little bit of, but make sure I'm not getting too much of? What's the best way to add in some of those varied responses? And so ultimately with emotional regulation, we just want to try to look at how we can best regulate our body and how we can best regulate our mind. Again, because emotions can be very difficult to control, it's difficult just to say, okay, well, I want to feel happy right now, or I don't want to feel frustrated anymore. We can't just change that for ourselves. We really need to look at what kinds of actions can I take? And that's where we can come back to really being action driven here. So what actions can I take to calm myself down physically, to actually start to address the physiological response that my body's having? But also, are there things that I can be thinking about? Are there ways that I can direct my attention that are they going to help? And are there behaviors that I can be doing too? So those are some of the things that we'll be thinking through and talking through. Before we get into that specifically, just wanted to give you this stoplight example. It can be a really kind of easy way to check in with yourself. It can be something that you use to communicate with your coach, if this is something that your coach is kind of aware of. So green, this is typically where we want to be. We want to feel like that we are in emotional control. And it doesn't mean that we're happy or that we're feeling some of those positive emotions, again, staying away from that word, but just some of those emotions that we feel as good or desirable. It just means that even if I'm frustrated, I'm still managing it. Even if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I've got strategies to be able to control that. I've got strategies to work through it. So we're in control. We're able to regulate some of those emotions. In the yellow, this is where we're starting to slip a bit. We feel like, okay, I'm not quite where I want to be, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. I'm trying some things out, but I still don't feel like I'm quite in control. And then red, this is where emotions take over. And so again, it can be the frustration, it can be the anger, it can be the excitement, it can be whatever emotion, but it's dominating and it's in control, and it's really driving what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're acting. And so even just this, I'm green, yellow, I'm red, that can be a starting point in terms of building that awareness and starting to look at where I am and what I want to do. And so the sooner we can start to apply some of these strategies that we'll go over on the next slide, just helps you to be able to look at how can you regulate yourself and how can you be able to work to maintain that control as a way to maintain some of that performance. So with this, there's lots of information, well, there's lots of ideas on this slide. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through them. I'm going to talk through a lot of them. I'm going to talk through them all. Some of them you're maybe more familiar with. Some of them you're maybe less familiar with. Ultimately, these are all going to target kind of one of three areas. They're going to target you physically to help you try to regulate your body as a way to calm your body down, which in turn can help to calm down your emotions or control your emotions. They're going to look at actions that you can take. So some of those behaviors that are guiding you towards how you want to be, so that you feel like I can focus on this action and my emotion is still there, but recognizing that I can take these steps even when I feel emotional. And then the third one is just directing thoughts. And so again, you can feel emotional, but how do I want to be thinking? What are some of the things I want to be reminding myself about as a way to regain some of that control? So these are all different ways to regulate yourself, all different options. That being said, they're not the only ones or not the right ones. It's just to give you a number of different strategies. Some of them maybe you're using, some of them you're not. but just to think through what might work for me. So we're going to start at the top kind of right, the deep breathing. Again, this is probably one of the most common ones. Obviously, we're breathing all the time. Typically, we're not paying attention to it, especially when we're feeling like we're starting to get emotionally activated and our body's starting to get activated. We can't control how much we're sweating. We can't control how fast our heart is beating, but we can control our breathing. And so that's a really good way to start to regulate our body. And so just focusing on those long, slow, deep breaths in, holding it for that second, and that exhale. And again, you can focus on how the air feels coming into your body, how your chest is expanding. You can focus on releasing tension as you're exhaling. That deep breathing can be really helpful. I had to do deep breathing with my 5-year-old last night. He was not happy, and we did cookie breathing. And it's a really good, another way to think about it. You imagine you've got a plate of cookies that just came out of the oven, and you want to breathe it in and smell it. So you take that deep breath. You can actually hear the air coming in as if you're smelling something. And then you realize they're still too hot and you have to blow it out and try to cool them down. So that can be a way where you're breathing in through your nose, you're actually noticing that noise, and then you breathe out, and again, you're making that noise, you're actually noticing the air going out. It can just be kind of a fun way to focus on breathing too, where you do this breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. But ultimately with deep breathing, it's about whatever's going to feel best for you. If you just prefer to do mouth breathing or all nose breathing, just focus on that slow, comfortable rhythm. That's ultimately what's going to slow down your body and start slowing your breathing down as well. So that can be one thing. If we think back to that chart with how the different emotions can affect our body and where we notice it, especially in those areas of red, we might feel like our muscles are starting to get tense. We might feel that we're starting to hold a lot of stress just because of the emotions that we're feeling, especially if we're feeling emotions like anger or fear or uncertainty. Those can be things that really are part of our stress response that make us want to try to fight against something, protect ourselves, run away. And so our muscles are primed to be able to react just because of those emotions that we're feeling. And again, if we're storing a lot of extra tension in our muscles, that can impact how you're actually physically performing. It can throw off your swing. It can throw off how you're actually going through your game of golf. And so if you can actually do a body scan and think, okay, where am I holding some of my tension? What are some of the things that I'm noticing? How can I relax myself? That can be a really good starting point. And so some of the places that we typically hold tension are going to be in our jaw, where we start to clench our teeth. You notice your shoulders or your neck, like your shoulders up under your ears. Sometimes we make our fist. We just feel like we're clenching our fists. Sometimes we feel like we're holding it through like our core and our glutes into our legs, like we're just kind of clenching things. Lots of different places that we can hold stress. And it's just about basically doing a body scan, kind of thinking through from your head to your toes. Am I feeling tense? Am I feeling tense right now? Am I feeling any extra stress, any extra tension? And so maybe you notice that your hands are clenched. So what you do is you take your fist and you just kind of squeeze it tighter. You don't want to squeeze it as hard as you can because we're not wanting to hurt ourselves. You just kind of squeeze it a little bit, make it a little bit tighter, hold it for a second, pay attention to that tension, and then you relax it and shake it out. Obviously, if you're doing that with your fists, you can squeeze it a bit tighter, but especially if you're doing your jaw or your neck, you don't want to really tense. We don't want to injure ourselves. It's just about taking our tension from here, increasing it a little bit, holding it, and then when we relax it, it goes down to a lower level. And so that can be a way, again, just to cue our muscles to relax, cue our body to relax, and then that can send signals back to our brain of this is how my body is feeling. Let's reevaluate some of those emotions. So those are obviously a couple physical ones targeted at really trying to counteract that physical response that we sometimes have when we're feeling emotional. The next couple of visualizing success specifically is mostly a cognitive one. It's how we're kind of thinking. It's kind of an action as well, just because we're going through this process. But especially if we're starting to feel emotional, being able to focus on how we want to play, what we want to do, maybe how we've played in the past, being able to see ourselves making really good shots, being able to see some of those swings or see where that ball is landing. Visualizing that success for ourselves can be a way just to feel like we're resetting, especially if some of those emotions are coming up and starting to take over. It's just reminding yourself that I have been successful, I can be successful, and that can sometimes change how you're thinking. And again, if we go back to that cycle, our thoughts impact our emotions, impact our body, impact our behavior. So it can help to reset that cycle as well. So the visualizing success can be a helpful one. In terms of mindfulness, this is just about bringing yourself back to the present, bringing yourself back to the moment. In terms of mindfulness, so many different ways to do this, so many different ways to kind of tune in. One way that I'll talk you through is just basically about trying to incorporate a number of different senses. And so I call it a take 5. Basically, you start thinking, what are 5 things that I can see right now? And so you start actually looking around and you can notice the different things around you. You kind of pause and land on it for yourself, pay attention to it. And then you look, okay, what are 4 things I can feel? And with feeling, you can use like physical touch, things that you can touch. It can be things that you're feeling in your body. So, okay, I notice that my feet are cold, or I notice that there's wind on my face. You can do it that way, or you can do emotions too if you want. Especially if you're trying to regulate emotions, you probably want to stay away from that. But sometimes just naming it, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling frustrated. Sometimes it just helps to notice, okay, I can name it, I can be there. I don't have to feed into it. So again, there's a few different options for what you might do with the feeling part of it. So 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear. And this is where you're tuning, again, externally, just noticing what are some of the things. Can you hear other players around you? Can you hear the wind in the trees? Can you hear a bird? What can you notice? 2 things, this is 2 things you can taste or smell. Again, those are sometimes senses that are less available to us, again, especially if we're maybe out on the golf course. But what are 2 things you can taste or smell? If you're really feeling at a loss, maybe you're grabbing a drink of water and just paying attention to that. And then you wrap it up with 1 slow, deep breath. And again, by doing that, you're actually starting to just externalize a little bit. You're starting to notice what's going on around you. You're starting to ground yourself a little bit. And that can be a way just to slow things down and slow down that brain process and just change how you're actually regulating some of those emotions. Have a routine. And so this is something where we know that having a routine can really help with pre-shot. It can help with getting ready before a training session or getting ready before a round. It just helps to create that consistency so that our body knows what to expect, but our brain knows what to expect too. And so coming back to that routine can feel really comforting. It can feel really calming. And again, going through those processes, it's not for a superstitious, I have to do this, otherwise I won't be successful. It's I'm doing this as a way to get my mind and body ready for what I need to do next, for this next shot that I have to take, or for the decision that I have to think through. And so again, coming back to some of those things can really help just to calm your emotions down. Using positive self-talk, so being able to just kind of talk yourself through it. And so we can be positive in a few different ways. We can be positive in terms of instructing yourself. So, okay, I just need to maybe keep my elbow in, or I need to drop my shoulder, whatever it is, you can kind of instruct yourself or talk yourself through some of those corrections that you need to make. We can also look at being kind of motivational or inspiring to ourselves. So I got this, regroup, I'm strong, like whatever it is that kind of gets you feeling more positive, we can do that too. It can also just be realistic. You know what? I missed that shot. I felt frustrated. That's normal. That happens. That's a very normal response to something like that. Doesn't mean that it has to take over. I'm not going to let it take over. And you can kind of talk yourself through it. Like, yes, it's an emotion. Yes, it happened, but I'm just going to let it pass. I'm not going to feed into it too much. And so you can kind of talk yourself through, okay, that's gone. I'm going to let it go. And so sometimes that can be a really helpful reminder. Obviously, that can be more kind of thought-based. But coming back to another physical one, just taking care of your body. So obviously taking care of our body day to day helps with our performance. Things like sleep, things like proper fueling, proper hydration, those are all important. But also making sure that you're taking care of your body if you're out there on a long day for a round. And so thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get myself through this round? Is it really hot? Is it cold? Am I getting enough water? Am I having a snack? Those kinds of things. So just being able to take care of yourself, because if we're able to take care of ourselves, that's another way to actually calm our bodies down and make sure that we're able to just regulate those emotions that we're feeling through our body responses. In terms of taking a break, I know you can't actually just walk off the golf course and take a break whenever you want. This is just, how do you take that mental break? What does that look like for you? Is it actually just physically taking a step back, maybe creating some separation between you and the hole, or you and your golf clubs, or you and the other player, and just that physical break can sometimes feel like a bit of a separation. Being able to just stop and focus on your breathing, be able to actually disengage from the game, and maybe you're looking around, doing a scan, what does that break look like for you? And so sometimes that just being able to quickly take yourself out of the situation, feel like you're resetting, that can be really helpful. It's not avoidance because you're doing it for a purpose. You're thinking, okay, I'm just going to disengage. I'm going to look around. I'm going to see if I can notice where is that bird coming from, or where is that bird sitting in the tree, just kind of scanning, taking things in. And then you're feeling like when you get back, you're refreshed, you're ready to just manage things better. So that can sometimes be another way to feel like you're emotionally regulating things. And then again, reminding yourself that mistakes happen. And I know this is something we talked about. I know this is something that we all know, but recognizing that, okay, that was a mistake. That was something that happened that I didn't want. Whether it was just kind of feeling like you overreacted in terms of emotionally letting your emotions get the better of you, or a mistake actually on the golf course, recognizing, you know what, hey, that's done, it happened, I'm going to move on. And so anytime that you have an action to come to, what's my next step? What's my next shot? What do I need to do next? Again, it can just really help to guide you forward. So these are just obviously a number of different things, not the only ones. A lot of things that maybe aren't on here. If you're feeling really emotional, sometimes talking it through can be really helpful. And maybe that's something that you're able to do more easily day to day, as opposed to on the golf course, but that can be another option. I know sometimes people really like to journal, to write things down. And you might not be doing that on the golf course, but it might be something that you're coming back to do as a point of reflection after, or periodically through your week. And so being able to have that awareness of what are things that I can do on the golf course to help regulate myself, regulate my body, regulate so that I feel like I'm coming back to this midpoint. But also, are there things that maybe I'm doing day to day that are slightly different just because of the different resources that I have available? So obviously, if you're in the middle of the classroom, you might not be able to look around for that bird, but maybe there's something else that you can do. And so again, it's just trying to come up with what are these things that I'm already doing that are helping me, but what are additional things that you want to add in? And so this is where you're just going to go back to that reflection that you did earlier and think. The third question was, think of strategies you could have used to react in different ways. What would you change, or what could you add in? And now that we've talked through some of this, I just want you to go back to that and see if there's anything else that you'd like to add in based on some of the options that I gave you, maybe based on things that I said that triggered another thought, but just to have maybe one or two other things that you want to test out the next time you feel like you're starting to get emotional or starting to get a bit out of your zone. Okay, so again, it's just about being able to test these things out. And as I said at the start, if we can start noticing these emotions when they're smaller, so I'm starting to feel irritated versus I'm in a full out rage, we can notice when we're irritated, it's going to be a lot easier to use our routine or use our mindfulness to control things there, to regulate things there, than if we're in a full-blown rage. So again, the earlier we can start noticing these emotions, the earlier we can start to apply our strategies, the easier it's going to be. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It just means that you have a better chance to get yourself back kind of down that curve as opposed to going overboard and going off that catastrophe edge. So again, early recognition, early application of these coping skills is going to be really important. So let's go into our summary for the evening. Again, we started off with a lot about emotions, just going through those emojis, being able to start naming different emotions, being able to start recognizing what are some of the things that we can actually read into. And just that emotions are part of being human. They're part of how we express ourselves, part of how we relate to others on a day-to-day basis. And so part of what we want to do is just recognize that they can be really helpful, but that we just need to be able to regulate ourselves. And the first part of being able to regulate ourselves is by having that awareness and knowing what our tendencies are. So are you someone that tries to keep things in, not express things? Are you someone that tends to be very emotional all the time? Are you someone that maybe cries easily? Like, what are your tendencies? And just being able to start feeding into that. And with that, also knowing what kinds of situations or events can be triggering for you. So maybe there's something that you typically react quite strongly to, whether you're feeling sad or feeling angry or really feeling frustrated, maybe feeling really excited or really proud. Again, recognizing both spectrums or both ends of those emotional spectrums. And as we did through that reflection, just being able to know how you feel and how you react, and being able to look at what can be helpful with that. What are some of the strategies that actually work to help to regulate yourself, to feel like you're managing those emotions? What are things that maybe don't help? And then what are things that you could add in? And so again, the more we can start doing this, the more we can start practicing it, the better you're going to get at being able to regulate your emotions. It's a process. It can take some time. It can take some practice. But again, like any skill, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So I'm going to move into questions for the evening, see if there's anything that's come up. Again, you can unmute yourself, put things in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions in any form.
Lisa, do you have any suggestions for like self-talk? There's a lot of time on the golf course when you're not hitting a shot, you're waiting, and a lot of downtime. What would you suggest for somebody who's just starting with self-talk?
Yeah, self-talk's really interesting. And when I was putting this together, I was wondering how much I wanted to get into that, because self-talk and emotions, I think, are so intertwined, just because of that thoughts, emotions, behaviors cycle. With self-talk, again, it's just being able to recognize, are there cues or are there reminders that are going to be, and again, I'm using helpful versus unhelpful as opposed to positive and negative. And so what's something that's helpful for me to be thinking about right now? And again, it's coming back to kind of those three different areas of, is this something that I want to be kind of challenging? So is this something that I need to maybe have some instruction with? I need to replace what was happening. Is this something where I need to kind of pump myself up or be more encouraging? Is this something that I just need to let go? And so with that, we can look at challenging self-talk. So if you say like, I never hit this shot, or I never play well on this course, okay, well, number one, never, we can probably challenge that and start looking, okay, is that realistic? Is it maybe just last round you didn't play well? And then again, if it is never, if that's actually true, okay, well, just because it's never doesn't mean that I can't play well there today. And so sometimes we just have to look at those statements and just actually stop and repeat them and think, okay, what's true here? Is there something that I'm able to change up? And so sometimes challenging those statements can be really helpful, and that can change how we're thinking about it, which can change those emotions that are tied to it. So that can be one example. Sometimes it's just recognizing that, you know what, if we start feeding into those thoughts too much, that can be a negative thing too. And so, yeah, I never play well this course. I'm just going to let that pass because it's not actually important. I don't need to hang on to that one. And so we have so many thoughts, we have so many emotions each day that if we try to feed into every single one, it's not going to always do us a service. And so, okay, let's let that one pass. Let's maybe think about what's going to be more helpful right now. And so being able to recognize that we have that choice sometimes to pick and choose what we actually kind of hone in on for those thoughts. And having thoughts planned out ahead of time can be a really good starting point, especially just, okay, what do I want to be thinking about? What do I want to be saying to myself? And so maybe you've got some reminders, phrases or words. That can be a really good way to just, even if it's something like reset, that could be an example. You plan that out ahead of time. You're saying that after a shot, and then you're saying that before you go up to take your next shot. That could be an example. So whatever it is with self-talk, sometimes just being able to plan it out and have some of those things at the back of your mind.